Okay, there we go. Can everybody see that? If you can unmute.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you so much. So what we are talking about today is we are talking about sexual health education at CPS. We are going to start by diving into some data to look at why we do what we do. So we're going to use the data. I'm going to show you the data that we use to drive the sexual health education program at CPS. So this first data slide that we're looking at is data related to sexually transmitted infections and HIV. So in 2008, Chicago had the highest number of chlamydia cases on record and the highest number of gonorrhea cases in a decade. And then to break it down even further, youth ages 13 to 29 comprised 78.5% of chlamydia cases, 69% of gonorrhea cases, 42% of primary and secondary syphilis, and 41.1% of HIV/AIDS infections. So this data comes from the Chicago Department of Public Health. So this is Chicago-specific data. And when we see data like this, I know it can be kind of staggering, and we're throwing you in right at the very beginning of this session, and I'm giving you all the data right up front. But I think it's important to think about why our children are learning things at the ages that they are, and realizing that youth starting from as young as 13 are experiencing some things like these STIs and HIV kind of helps put some of that into perspective. So this slide that we're looking at is the percentage of high school students who ever had sexual intercourse. So this data is specific to Chicago Public Schools. It comes from an anonymous survey that is given out by the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, which is the government agency. And that government agency gives the survey out to different school districts. So the data that we're looking at now is going to be specific to students who are in our CPS schools. So this is the percentage of high school students who ever had sexual intercourse. So take a second to look at this graph, and then if you're comfortable either unmuting to talk or writing in the chat box, tell me what you notice about this data. What do we see here? Give a few more seconds in case anyone wants to share.
It looked like it's going down from 1991 to 2019.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing. So we do see a decrease from 1991 down to 2019. So the reason that this is important is because we have a lot of concerns from a lot of parents and guardians that if we teach sexual health education, the students are going to start having sex all the time. And that is just not going to be true. So comprehensive sexual health education, access to having sexual health education does not equal sexual activity. So again, just another important thing to keep in mind. Also, when we're thinking about our students who are sexually active, in high school, again, this is CPS specific, only 31% of our high school students are reporting ever having sexual intercourse. This next slide that we're seeing is now percentage of high school students who used a condom during their last sexual intercourse. So this data, again, similarly, it's from that survey. This is Chicago Public Schools specific. And with condom usage, we kind of see an increase at the very beginning of the data from 1991 up to 1995, and then it kind of lays steady for a while. We do have a decrease in 2017 and then a big increase in 2019. So again, when we're thinking about that first slide, thinking about how high the rates of some of these STIs are and HIV amongst our young people in the city of Chicago, we do want to realize that only about 60% of them are using condoms during their last sexual intercourse. So when we're thinking about why are our young people experiencing these STIs, we do have to also think about condom access. So things when we think about condom access is something that's a little tricky, and we can come back to it later as we're getting more into the session. But another thing I just want you to kind of keep in the back of your mind is that condoms might be challenging for our young people to access. So the next data we're going to look at is also from that same survey. So this is specific to Chicago Public Schools. In the right-hand corner of the slide, we see 21% of CPS high school students identify as LGBTQ, that's lesbian, gay, bisexual, or queer questioning. 2% of CPS high school students identify as trans, and 1% of CPS middle school students identify as trans. So I'm going to leave this slide up here for just a minute or so you can read through some of these statements and see the percentage of our students who are experiencing these things. If you have thoughts or reflections as you're reading through these, feel free to unmute and share or type in the chat box.
Well, it's always jarring just to see, even, it's not a high number of students that experience having to do sexual things that they were not wanting to do or being forced to have intercourse. But it's still jarring to see those numbers that, first of all, they double for the LGBTQ students. So that in itself is jarring. And of course, we know that these numbers are what's being reported and what's not being reported. So it's just always a reminder that we have to have those conversations with students.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's a really good point. Does anybody else have any feelings they want to share? Thoughts about this data? I do think what was just said is very important. So thinking about, what's reported versus not reported. Also, there are some things we have to think about in terms of education. So for a lot of our students, maybe they're new to the district, maybe they don't have anybody at home to talk to about these things. It is possible and something that we tend to see frequently where students don't necessarily understand that a situation was sexual violence. So also just making sure that we're educating students on experiences that they may see in their lifetime and what to do about that, how to stop those things. So again, just another data slide that can be pretty jarring and pretty emotional to read and to look at, but just a way to kind of keep this data in mind as we run through to talk about the curriculum. What we're going to do right now is talk through what the sexual health education policy looks like. So CPS has had a sexual health education policy for a long time. The policy that is currently in place was rewritten in 2013. I do want to note that we are currently in the process of updating our policy again. So some of these points may look a little bit different in the fall or winter this year, but if our policy changes again, people who are involved in FACE meetings and parents and guardians will be notified of policy changes. So for right now, we'll focus on the policy as it stands today. So right now, there's a minimum requirement for teaching minutes for all of our students. So all students in grades kindergarten through 12th grade should be receiving sexual health education annually. So every single year, we want our students to be receiving sexual health education. It's important to know that our education is age appropriate and developmentally appropriate and medically accurate. So some parents and guardians get really worried when they think about their kindergarten student getting sexual health education. It is important to remember it is going to be developmentally appropriate. So the topics our kindergartners are learning are very different than the topics that our high school students are learning. So there's a minimum number of teaching minutes. For grades kindergarten through 4th grade, we're looking at 300 minutes per grade. That's going to be every single year. And for grades 5 through 12, we're looking at 675 minutes per grade every single year. So all of our students, again, should be receiving sex ed every single year, and every student should be receiving the education, whether they are a diverse learner or not. That is something our team is working on improving right now as well. The principal has to designate a minimum of 2 instructors per school. So every single school at CPS should have at least 2 people who have been trained in sexual health education. In order to be trained in sexual health education, it requires that you attend the training, which is led by our team, and you pass the exam with an 80% or higher. So there is a training that happens, and at the end of the training, there's an exam, and you have to pass that exam with an 80% or higher. All of our work is aligned with the National Sexuality Education Standards. So that is a group of people created those standards who are experts in the field, and all of our curriculum as well as the policy is aligned with these standards. Abstinence is a component of healthy sexual decision-making. So this is a piece I really want to make sure is clear to all of our parents and guardians and families and students when we are talking about abstinence. Abstinence is an option of sexual health, right? So there's a lot of decisions you can make when it comes to having sex. One of those decisions is abstaining. So we do teach about abstinence because that is an option. It's the option that most of our students choose. If you remember back to that high school stats that we were looking at, abstinence is the option most of our students are choosing. However, we do not teach abstinence only education. So we do not say that you can't have sex. We just tell students there's a lot of options when it comes to having sex. One of the options is choosing to abstain from sex. Next is that we do want parent involvement in the education, which is why you're here today and what we'll get into in the next few slides. And last, the approved CBOs. I saw there was a note in the chat. So CBO stands for community-based organization. So an approved community-based organization can provide instruction. So we have a lot of community-based organizations that we work with. Some examples are Planned Parenthood, Howard Brown Health, Broadway Youth Center. So we work with a lot of these community-based organizations, and they attend our trainings as well. So anyone who works at an approved community-based organization has to be trained by CPS the same way that a teacher would need to be trained. They still have to get at least an 80% on that exam. And if they do, then they can teach sexual health education in schools. Okay, so now we're going to break down. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I have a question. What do the education look like for the K first, second, and third? How do you all teach that?
It's a really great question. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at this slide right here. So the curriculum for grades kindergarten through fourth grade is really foundational knowledge. So sometimes it used to be called family life education. We just think about it as kind of those beginning building blocks for sexual health education. So the things that are really important to us, especially in grades K1 and 2, those are going to be our youngest 3 grades. So those grades, we really want to be teaching anatomy and physiology. So it's important to us that students have the medically accurate terms for what their body parts are and what body parts are for other people who have differing bodies than they do. We focus a lot on identity, and we focus a lot on healthy relationships and personal safety. So kindergarten, first grade, and second grade are really focusing on anatomy, identity, and healthy relationships and personal safety. The reason that it's so important to us to have a strong focus on anatomy and using medically accurate terms for our young people, for their bodies, is because we know that we've seen in the past that a lot of young people who are experiencing some sort of sexual violence, when they go to report it, if they have never learned the medically accurate terms for body parts, they have a hard time reporting what has happened to them. So it's really important to us that from a young age, starting in kindergarten, that the medically accurate terms are being used. So we want them to know the term penis, the term vagina, breast, anus, for example. We want them to have that language so that they are safe to communicate with a doctor, a parent, a guardian, or any safe person in their life if they need to be doing so. So that's kind of where the anatomy piece comes in. Identity is going to be broad. So identity focuses on gender identity as well as your identity in the different roles in your life. So what kind of role do you play in your family? What kind of role do you play with your friends? Kind of understanding who you are and what that means to you. And then healthy relationships and personal safety is going to be focusing around your relationships with other students, relationships with teachers, coaches, parents, family members. And personal safety is really teaching students who they can go to if something's wrong. So from kindergarten, first and second grade, there are a few lessons that repeat every single year where we ask students to identify at least 5 safe adults that they have in their life. And we talk to our students about how if something happens that doesn't feel good in your life, you can tell your safe adult. And if your first safe adult doesn't believe you or doesn't have a way to help you, you can talk to your second safe adult. So we help students kind of figure out who these people are so that they can make sure they have a safety network that they can look to if something happens in their life that they want to talk about. We add in puberty and adolescent development and reproduction at the end of third grade and at the beginning of fourth grade. So fourth grade is really when we start doing the puberty lessons. And that's going to be a lot of education around why is my body changing? What is the purpose of my body's changing? Does it have to change? Can I stop it from changing? those kind of questions that we see from our young people that are either just starting to experience puberty or are fearful of puberty and have a lot of questions wrapped up in that. So that's kind of the foundational knowledge for grades K through 4. Did that help answer your question?
So, Emily,
Yes.
I was wondering, is there fluidity in the curriculum like there is in all other subjects that are taught by our teachers? So, if it and how it's presented, and I think that's a concern as a parent. I have a 7-year-old that is heading to second grade. I'm not concerned because we have these conversations at home. So we have an open discussion about all things when it comes to reproductive health. Um, However, I know there are a lot of families that don't feel comfortable with that. And we've also just gotten to the point where we're having those conversations because he did, as most young children ask early on, how did I come here? Where did I come from?
Mm-hmm.
And every home and every family decides to do that in a different way. And so I know that's what parents often of young children react to because some students still do not know that the baby, comes from the father having sex, and that the baby, because my son's question, this is the perfect example. So his question was, I explained the physiology of where babies came from.
Mm-hmm.
But wanted to know, how did he come out? And where did he come out of? So I came out of your stomach. Well, so
Yeah.
around that. But now that when he last year, I was like, no, you came out of my vagina. But that's okay for me to have that conversation at home. So do teachers have leeway? Like what is that shaped? I think that's one of the fears that parents have. Like I personally wouldn't have problems with the teacher telling them that, but I know and understand that some parents might.
Yes, absolutely. So really great question. And I think that was a very good example. That's one of the questions that comes up frequently is where did I come from? Or if the parent is expecting another child and is pregnant, we get a lot of but how did the baby get inside of you? So we hear a lot of questions like that. So that's a really good point. Teachers do have, so I'm going to kind of answer two questions in one and hopefully answer the question that you were asking. So there is leeway in the curriculum where teachers are instructed that they should be teaching the grade that corresponds with the grade they teach. So if you are a 5th grade teacher, you should be teaching the 5th grade curriculum. But if it is clear to you that your students, after the first lesson, that maybe they've never gotten sex ed before, maybe this is the first time that the school has been teaching sex ed, if they need some more beginner information, then they'll notify parents that they're actually going to be teaching different lessons. And we'll talk about parent notification in a few slides. So they'll notify them of the switch in curriculum and teach to the more of the student's level where it seems like they'll get the information that is what they actually need. There are going to be situations where there are students in class who come from a household that has already had these conversations, and they'll be much more advanced than their peers in the class who maybe have never had these conversations before. So in those situations, we look to those students as kind of like a helper to help kind of guide the teacher through those conversations with students. In terms of comfortability of parents and with the teacher expressing this info, in a few slides, we're going to talk about parent opt-out. But I will say now so that everybody understands, so there is the option to remove your child from the education. So sexual health education is a requirement within Chicago Public Schools. However, state law is that Illinois parents and guardians have the option to opt their child out of this education. So you can opt your child out of individual lessons or out of the entire curriculum. So if you realize that you would really like to have that where do babies come from conversation on your own and you don't want your child to learn about that at school, you can look through that curriculum and figure out when they're going to be teaching it. And you can have your child out of that lesson. You can take them out of that lesson so that you're the person providing that education. And then you can have them join for other lessons. Or you can choose to decide that sexual health education is something you want to teach all at home and you don't want them to learn any of it at school, and then you can opt them out of the entire curriculum. So there are options there for parents who really would just prefer to have these kind of conversations at home with their child in a way that feels best for them as opposed to at school with the educator. Did that answer your question?
It really did, yes.
Okay, great. So what we're going to look at now is we're going to look through the 5th through 12th grade overview. So as I said before, the kindergarten through 4th grade is kind of that foundational knowledge, and every year you're going to kind of build upon itself. So 5th through 12th grade, that is when we're going to start talking about more conversations around reproduction, around abstinence, around contraceptives, transmission and prevention of STIs and HIV, informed decision making. So we do a lot of lessons around who are your influences in life and why do you make the decisions that you make. We're going to talk through sexual orientation, healthy relationships, and bullying. In 11th and 12th grade, the curriculum has been written in a way where it is very student-led. So in 11th and 12th grade, we have the students pick a sexual health topic, something that is related to sexual health. And in 11th grade, they work on their skills around debating. So they create an argument and have a debate around a sexual health issue of their choice. And in 12th grade, they do a research project based on whatever sexual health topic they want to pick. So 11th and 12th grade is very student-led. They kind of take the reins and decide what is the topic that they're going to be interested in. It could be something like gender discrimination. It could be something like abortion laws. So there's a lot of different options for our 11th and 12th grade students to kind of pick what feels best for them in their learning, because hopefully by the time they hit 11th grade, they've already received a lot of this education in a kind of a repetitive way since kindergarten. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take some time to chat with each other about the experiences that we had. So if anybody is willing to be a brave first volunteer, and either you feel free to type if that's easier for you in the chat box, or you can unmute. But is anybody willing to share what their sexual health education experience was like when they were a young person in school? Any brave volunteers to go first?
Okay, well, I grew up in Arkansas, so we when I learned about health education, I think it was like 6th grade, something like that, and they just showed us a whole bunch of disgusting pictures of what could happen if you have sex.
Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, we have a lot of that, the scare tactics type, where they show you a bunch of scary things and just hope that you'll never have sex. If you see these pictures, it'll scare you away from it. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else?
Linda Washington. I'm a baby boomer. We had none. We had no sex education in school.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. That's definitely the experience that we hear from a lot of our family members at CPS.
Yeah. So, my mother taught us different things, but at school, no, it wasn't even allowed. It wasn't allowed. So.
And did you grow up in the Chicago area?
Yes.
Great. Anybody else want to share?
Pardon?
Hi, I'm Tracy White. It was more a taboo situation. It really was. In high school, they touched upon a little of it, but we were always taught not to do it, bottom line. And when you tell a child not to do something, guess what that child does? Do it. So Planned Parenthood came along as an outsource, a resource that was shared with me because I had so many questions. So they didn't have it in the high schools, and I went to a Chicago public high school. They didn't have it in the high school, but they had started reaching out, letting kids know, or young adults know about Planned Parenthood, because the rates were going up so high, I guess. It was unheard. When I was coming through, they had just started having babies at 13, 14. They had always been doing it, but it was really happening.
Mm-hmm.
They had to do something. But I
Yeah.
don't remember taking a sex education class until I got older.
Yeah,
And
until you were able to make that choice for yourself and seek out the education yourself.
yes.
Thank you for sharing.
So I have the experience of going to both Chicago Public Schools and Archdiocese Catholic schools. So of course, in the Catholic schools, there was health classes, and we were taught about the anatomy, but it's a Catholic school, so sex was taboo for grammar school. And then when I went to a public grammar school, graduated from a public grammar school, there was a health curriculum, again, a lot about anatomy. I grew up in the late 80s, early 90s, so there was a lot of discussion around teen pregnancy and also about HIV/AIDS. So those things started to, have conversations, but not a real we would have in our social studies class, we would have discussions. But our health class, it was really just basic anatomy, not so much about sex. Now, once I got to high school, I went to a Catholic high school at first. And the reason why I want to share this is because I think it was a progressive high school. And I think it really depends on the teacher as well. I had a teacher who was not a nun, but she was very Catholic, very, very Catholic. But she taught us as a part of her she was my religion teacher, but as a part of her religion curriculum, there was a section on sexual health. And she was very forthcoming about what can happen, what are the things that can happen, how you protect yourself, all of those things. But she would then spin it, and I'll never forget this. She would always tell us, because this is a girls' school, it was a girls' school, and she would say, here's the thing, girls, just don't go in the basement. If you go in the basement, it's over. And she framed it in a way of, I love this story, because she framed it in a way of, and not in a shaming way. She was like, of course you want to go in the basement. Of course you want to have sex. Of course it feels good. But if you make that move, here's the next thing. And so once I got to public school, of course it was never spin in that way. It was just straight out, here's the basics, blah, blah, blah. But also not a lot of talk about reproductive health, really, and choices or identity, more just about anatomy.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you so much for sharing. Does anybody else want to share what their experience was like? So now what I want you to do is I want you to think about the experience you had. So if you shared, thank you so much. If you didn't, that's okay too. But reflect back on the experience you had growing up, and then think about your child or your children and the young people in your life and what kind of experience you would want for them. Would you want them to have the same experience you had, or would you want them to have a different experience? And if there's anyone who wants to share, like, what are you hoping for your young person when it comes to sexual health education? And if you're comfortable to unmute yourself and share with the group, that would be great. Otherwise, feel free to write in the chat box if that works better for you. But what kind of experience are you hoping for your young person?
I'm gonna go ahead and speak. I'm raising a son. My son is currently he's about to be 21, and when he graduated from from grammar school, I kind of shielded him from all that somewhat. Not a total shield. It's just that I wanted him to take his time getting into those conversations and getting into those experiences. So he went to an all boys school. And at the all boys school, of course, you're going to have other different situations there, but he was able to try to figure out where he wanted to be. And then I involved him in other groups like church groups. He took other classes, other places where he can meet females, and he can kind of just take his time. When he went to college, it kind of exploded, and he's had girlfriends, but he had found his first real girlfriend, and that was really a good experience for him. And then now he's found another girlfriend, so that's a very good. He's taking his time, so that's how I kind of sheltered him through all that. He asked questions along the way as he was growing up, but my thing was now I think I'm proud of the situation that he's in now, because now he knows what's for him, he knows who he is, he knows what he wants, and he values relationships.
Yeah, I think that's great. Thank you for sharing. And you said something that I really appreciate, where you said that he asked questions along the way. And I think one of the most important things for us at CPS is creating an environment where students feel comfortable to ask questions, either to their teacher or to somebody at home, whoever they feel safe to talk to. But we want students to feel like they have access to the answers that they're looking for if they do need to seek out information, because I'm sure we can all imagine what happens when we start Googling things about sexual health. We don't really know exactly what we're going to find. So creating a space where your young person, whether it's a child or a grandchild, or maybe you're an auntie to someone, whatever it is, but creating that space where you have created safety for the student so that they can talk to you when they have a question, I think is really important. And that's what we're trying to do as well. So I love that you said that. Does anybody else want to share kind of their hopes for their young person, what they're hoping for their young person's experience as it relates to sexual health?
Can I also say there is so much out here on the internet these days?
Yes.
And it's important that we create safe spaces for them, like you stated before, where they can come and ask questions, because the youth that I work with today, especially, they're starting to have sex at third grade now, as we may know. So to me, the knowledge, if you give them the knowledge, instead of them trying to learn it on their own, I think that would be a good best practice.
Yeah, I agree. I appreciate you saying that as well. I think that's really important. And I think we have to remember, oftentimes I think about the groups that attend different FACE sessions, how we have a group of parents and guardians or community members who are attending our FACE sessions, who are really looking to improve their experience and their child's experience in the best way possible. And we also have a lot of young people in our schools who don't have the similar supports from an adult at home. So making sure that there's at least those 2 teachers in every school who are trained, making sure that we have at least 2 people at the school who know how to answer these questions and will do so in a way that is safe for the student, is something that we're really looking for, to keep people or students in a safe environment and given them the opportunity to ask questions if they have. So I think that that's great. So what we're going to do now is just talk through CPS's view on the primary importance of parents. So we talked about this a little bit before, but parents are the primary educators. And this is going to be true from the day that that young person comes into your life. So parents and guardians are the primary educators. And when we think about sexual health education, it goes so far as to say, even per Illinois state law, the state law in Illinois will say that parents are the primary educators of sexual health education. Because of that, that is why there is such a strong policy around opting your child out of education. So we talked about it very briefly before, but parents and guardians do have the option to opt their child out of sexual health education. So you can opt out of one individual lesson, you can opt out of a few lessons, or you can opt out of the entire curriculum. So you have the opportunity as a parent or a guardian to decide that the education might not be the best for your child to receive in that format, in that classroom at school, and you can opt them out of it. We also will provide you with 3 notifications about instruction. So before your school starts teaching sex ed, you should get 3 different forms of notification telling you that sex ed is going to be starting. Usually, at least one of these notifications, maybe all 3, would be a paper copy of like a flyer that gets sent home at school. However, because we are going to be fully remote in the fall, those notifications are going to happen over email. So that is just something that I want you to keep in mind, is that we will be doing email communication, and schools will be doing email communication more as we're remote. And I see, Tracy, you had a question. Is there any options once a parent opts out? So it's a really good question. Once a parent opts out, we are going to be able to provide you with some additional resources, which I'll talk about in a minute. So there are some things that my team in my office, in the Office of Student Health and Wellness, can provide to families who want to opt out of sex ed, but still want to continue these conversations with their child at home. So you can opt out. You should be getting 3 forms of notification. Like I just said, after Tracy asked that great question. So we do encourage you to continue a dialogue with your child. It's very, very important that students are having these conversations. The bulk of these conversations are focused around student safety. We want students, again, to know the medically accurate terms for their bodies. We want them to know how to say no, and we want them to know who they can talk to if somebody isn't respecting the facts that they're saying no. So we do really encourage a dialogue, and that's where our resources will come in. And the last point I just want to call out is that we do offer a chance to review the lesson plans. So if you are unsure if you want your child to be learning sex ed in school or not, you can reach out to the teacher who's going to be teaching those sessions, and they can kind of run through those lessons with you to talk through exactly what's going to be taught, so that you have a better understanding of, yes, I want my child to receive this education in school, or no, I don't. So the resources that are currently available or soon to be available, because some are coming soon, first one is called the Scope and Sequence. So the Scope and Sequence is a resource that has a 1-sentence description of every single lesson for every single grade. So the Scope and Sequence, the old version is on our public-facing website, and we're working to get the new updated version on the website. So that should be up there shortly. We can also email it to the FACE managers who can share it with you as well. But the Scope and Sequence is a really good resource if you're wondering what's happening. My child's getting 10 lessons about sex ed. What's happening in these lessons? That is a really good resource to look at, because it'll explain 1 sentence, very quick, lesson by lesson, what is being taught. The Scope and Sequence is available in all of the CPS main languages. So I think there's about 8 or 9 languages that the Scope and Sequence is available in. Next is the Frequently Asked Questions information sheets for grades K through 5. Grades 6 through 12 will be coming soon as well. So this is another form where, and this was brought up earlier when we were talking about, where do babies come from? But it is a piece of paper that lists common student questions from students in those grades, and then the answers that we would give as CPS instructors. So if you know that your child has a lot of questions and you're not exactly sure how you want to answer the questions, or you want to opt your child out of sex ed, but you still want to talk about these things at home, this Frequently Asked Questions page is going to be a really good resource, because it just provides a link to questions. So some examples would be, where do babies come from, as an example. Another question we see commonly asked with our younger students is, why does somebody's family look different than my family? So some families have one parent, some families have no parents. So just kind of like figuring out family dynamics. Also questions like, can boys wear pink? So we see a lot of these like frequently asked questions that we see with our young students, and we will be coming out with a FAQ form for all grades. So that is to be coming soon. Next resource is a booklet called Keeping My Family Safe. It is a sexual abuse prevention workbook from an organization called Chicago Children's Advocacy Center. This is best for families with younger students, kind of like kindergarten through 5th or 6th grade, but it's a workbook to help create a plan that everybody creates together so that you understand how to keep your young people safe from sexual abuse. Next resource is just the curriculum. So again, you do have the option to view that curriculum with the educator who's going to be teaching it if you have questions about the lessons. And the last resource is sexual health education sessions for parents and guardians. So we have heard previously at a lot of different FACE meetings that we've been at that a lot of parents and guardians have said, I really want to talk to my child about sexual health, but I never learned it when I was in school, so I don't know how to have these conversations. So we are going to start working with our community-based organizations, those CBOs. We're going to start working with those organizations to come to FACE meetings to teach some parent sexual health education, because we do understand that the education we're teaching students right now is education that a lot of our parents and guardians were never able to access, because at the time that they were in school, sex ed was not being taught. So we will also have those sessions, which can help facilitate conversations with your young people. We don't have too much time, but I do want to hear briefly from you what kind of sessions would be the most helpful. So feel free to either write in the chat box or unmute. But when we're thinking about these parent education sessions, is there something that you can think of off the top of your head right now, some type of session that would be helpful for you or for other parents that you may know? And if you can't think of anything right now, you can add it in an evaluation or reach out to your FACE managers and they can get back to us with this information as well. But just something to start thinking about is if there's a topic that you realized you never actually received formal education on and maybe you want that education, that's something that we can definitely do for all of you. So we are thinking about some of those sessions. Another question that we have for you, and again, you can write in the chat box or unmute or provide information in your evaluation, is the format in which you want information. Is it best for you, letters home from school, because we were announced today that will be remote. So letters home from school won't be happening right now. But other options are, would you like notice on your school website? Do you want emails? Do you want robocalls, social media posts? What would be the best way for you to receive those education? So that would be, or information. So that was something that would be really helpful for us. And then lastly, with what frequency do you want the information to come to you? So do you want, like, at the beginning of the year, one notice and then that's it? Or do you want a monthly notice? Like, what type of frequency are you looking for information related to sexual health education? So those are just some questions to brainstorm. I think we have a few minutes right now if you feel like you want to answer any of these questions. Otherwise, I'm going to keep this slide up right here, which has our email and phone number. Someone will pick up if you call that phone number. However, they are doing mostly COVID questions. So if you do have a sexual health question, I recommend emailing our email. I am usually the person who's going through that email inbox. So that's going to be sexualhealthed@cps.edu. And so I'll leave that up in case you want to write it down or take a picture. But with the last few minutes, if you have anything else to share, information that you would be looking for, or the frequency or the format of the information, feel free to write that in the chat box or unmute. And otherwise, if you don't have anything else to share, thank you so much for coming today. We always love talking to parents and guardians and having you. So I know they have an evaluation for you, so feel free to fill that out. And FACE managers, I'm not sure if you want to add anything in, and let me know if you want me to stop presenting so you can present something.
Oh, no, you're fine. Thanks, Emily. This was really, really informative. As a parent of a rising second grader, it's really great to hear what the curriculum will look like. Again, our parents have all different comfortability levels. I'm super comfortable, but I still want to know what it looks like. So it really doesn't matter how comfortable you feel about having those conversations. It's super important to have the information and to be able to reach out and ask you all for questions or ask you what else you can offer. So thank you so much for offering that information today. This was a great session. We've already dropped the evaluation in the chat box, so please grab that and send that in. And if you have any questions, again, for myself or for Emily, you can reach out to Sexual Health ed@cps.edu. And again, her number is 773-553-3560. And you can reach me or anyone on the FACE team by going to cpsparentu.org or on our our Facebook page or on the CPS main site, which, by the way, has gotten a refresh, and there is a new CPS main page, and it's really user friendly, and all parents should try to give it a go look at it, and that you can contact all of the departments of CPS there on that main page. page. And if you have any questions for me ever, you can reach out to me at ALEMIEUXSEALS at cps.edu. And I'm sorry, that's two A's, AALEMIEUX, SEALS at cps.edu. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you all don't have any other further questions, we're going to ask that you join us next time. Please remember again to fill out the registration for our FACE programming coming forward. We have 3 more weeks of programming, and we look forward to see you there. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.